President Biden today announced the country is ordering 200 million additional doses of COVID-19 vaccines. The goal is to have enough doses to vaccinate 300 million Americans. That's most of the country. The president expects the doses to be delivered by the end of summer. At a press conference today, he said bold action is needed.
This is a wartime effort. When I say that, people ask wartime, I say, yeah. More than 400,000 Americans have already died. I think it's 411 or 12 have died in 1 year of this pandemic. More than all the people who died all Americans who died in World War II. This is a wartime undertaking. It's not hyperbole.
And the president also announced increased distribution of vaccines amid complaints from states that they don't have enough. The CDC says that they will likely make 10.1 million doses available next week, up from this week's 8.6 million. And the president also said that he wants to see 1.5 million vaccinations per day going forward.
Joining us now with more on this mass vaccination undertaking is Washington Post national correspondent Philip Bump. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
First of all, let's talk about this 1.5 million vaccines per day. We're already at 1 million. Some folks say that he's under-promising it so that eventually it'll seem as though he succeeded. And it's becoming political again.
Right. Yeah, I mean, sort of inevitably, I think. I mean, one of the things that the Biden administration has been pretty pointed about is trying to lowball its estimates of things. It certainly was the case that we saw last year during the pandemic and under President Trump, that there were often a lot of predictions that were made that ended up not coming true. I think the Biden administration, in part as a response to that, is trying to undersell what it's expecting to be able to do. But yes, you're right. The new target of 1.5 million actually is in line with the just over 10 million doses per week that are going to be distributed. So it does make sense as a target goal. But you're right. I mean, the initial target was fairly modest.
If you heard that clip in the interview that we had during the president's news conference, Philip, he talked about this wartime mentality and how that would be needed to produce more vaccines. But can you tell us what has sort of made that change to allow that kind of promise to be made? How are we going to get to that point, making more vaccines?
Well, one of the main things, first of all, there are renewed conversations between the administration and Moderna and Pfizer, who have the two approved vaccines. The anticipation, according to Anthony Fauci, the country's lead epidemiologist, is that we'll have a Johnson & Johnson vaccine that'll be coming within a couple of weeks. The advantage of that is that it's a one-dose vaccine as opposed to Moderna and Pfizer, which are two. It's also the case that the administration has made a very pointed effort of using what's called the Defense Production Act, which allows the government to mandate manufacturers to produce certain things. And so they're producing more personal protective equipment, but they're also initiating an effort to try and produce more of the materials needed to actually produce the vaccines so that there won't be any of these sort of bottlenecks that we've seen over the course of the past month or so.
Let's talk a little bit more about Dr. Fauci, who seems to have a little bit of a different demeanor since this new administration has taken over. And also, the science, he says, is now leading the way. He's talking a lot about this new variant coming from South Africa. What changes can we see as far as the vaccination and as far as the pandemic?
Well, so far, it seems as though the vaccines that have already been approved can handle these new variants that have emerged. The more the virus spreads, the more likely it is we're going to see these variants because they sort of erupt spontaneously. And then if they are, for example, more contagious, can spread more easily. That's what happened, for example, with the UK variant and the South African variant. And so part of the effort is to try and tamp down the number of new infections so we limit the number of new variants. Again, so far, the variants seem to be handled by the virus. But yes, you're right. Fauci does have a very different tone in how he approaches things now. It very much is the case, and he said so explicitly last week, that he felt as though he was not able to speak as freely under the Trump administration as he can now. Tomorrow, the administration is going to have its first briefing specifically about COVID from the experts. Biden's not going to be part of it. It's just going to be Fauci and other members of the coronavirus task force team from within the White House, and that's something I think that is a marked change from what we've seen over the past 12 months.
And how about the messaging here? The president is trying to find that delicate balance of saying, united together, we are going to conquer this pandemic, but at the same time, we've got some dark days ahead. Right. And there's the knowledge that many Americans are not 100% convinced at all that the vaccine is safe to take.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, he's obviously right from the standpoint of the dark days, both because there's a lag time between new infections and new deaths of about 21 days or so. And what that means is that even though cases are dropping now, we can expect deaths to remain in the 3,000 or 4,000 range for the next couple of weeks at the very least. And if there are new, more contagious variants, which can spread quickly, then that can mean more cases surging again. All of that said, you're right. It is absolutely the case that in order to be able to contain this, to reach what's called herd immunity, which is a level at which the virus can't spread easily because so many people already have immunity to it. The goal is to have enough people vaccinated that we can reach herd immunity and then therefore come back to some semblance of normal life. But if people are hesitant to take the vaccine, it becomes less likely to do so. One thing we've seen is polling indicates people are more likely to say they want to get the vaccine now. And I think as time passes and it becomes more and more apparent that a vaccine is safe and having an impact, hopefully people will start to change their minds.
You talk about unity, and he uses unity as his theme, not just as far as the vaccines are concerned, but it becomes very polarizing because a lot of people don't want to unite necessarily, and they don't like the way he says, let's get together on his terms.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that the phrase used there, "get together on his terms," that is the subjective point at which people reach a point of contention. When you ask Biden what he means, Washington Post reporter actually asked him that yesterday, and what he said is that Congress doesn't have the same level of vitriol, and they can actually work together to pass things that Americans want to see passed. Obviously, that is fairly innocuous in and of itself. One of the fascinating things we see in polling, though, is that Democrats are consistently, both at this point and historically, more likely to say they want their leaders to compromise than are Republicans. And so what that sets up is an imbalance in terms of what people understand bipartisanship and unity to mean, which falls along partisan lines itself. And so that is a problem. If you are a president who says, I want to unite the country, and the other half of the other political half of the country says, well, we don't want our leaders to compromise, that's a tricky position to be in.
All right, Philip Bump with the Washington Post. Thank you so much. Be safe, be well.
Of course, thank you, you too.
Thank you. Well, there is still a lot of confusion over how to schedule your vaccine appointment. First, make sure you're eligible right now. Anyone over 65, as well as some categories of frontline workers, can get the shot right here in Illinois. It's not open to everyone, though. Walgreens, Jewel, and the state of Illinois are all offering vaccination signups. But we're hearing from viewers appointments aren't not always available, likely due to the vaccine shortage. You can read more about vaccinations in your area at coronavirus.illinois.gov. There's also more information at the Cook County Department of Public Health at the number on your screen, 833-308-1988. We have all of that information on our website as well, WGNTV.com.